Welcome to the Honest Reflection Podcast with your hosts, Cody Hairston and Nick Woods. Here, we want to help you reflect on your week and be honest about your relationship with God. We hope you enjoy this episode.
We're glad to have you listening into another episode here. As always, if you like what you hear today, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share with your friends. Nick, how's it going this week?
It's been a good week. We've had some visitors. It's been busy. We kind of talked about some other stuff. We have some people who are moving, and so trying to help with that. And it's all good things ultimately, right? Because we're working together to serve the Lord. But some weeks are busier, stickier, whatever, and scheduling wise. But it's always good, and it's always good to be like able to take some time out and just like chat. I like that we're able to just kind of like chat about the scripture and like we're doing today. So I'm looking forward to it. How about you? How's your week been?
It's been good. We actually had a baptism on Sunday, and I don't think I had mentioned that. It was like a Sunday afternoon, so I kind of knew a little bit about some of the things that were going on, some of the conversations that were being had, and I was like waiting patiently by my phone, and then 4 o'clock rolled around, 5 o'clock rolled around, didn't get a text, and then I got impatient. I texted them, and they were like, "Oh yeah." They were too busy celebrating and whatnot. Yes. So that was an awesome beginning to the week. We have a new sister in Christ, and the kingdom got one soul larger, so that's a really good thing. And then on Saturday this week, a bunch of our young guys are going to help move a tree out of the backyard of one of our older couples, and it's a good thing when you see young men putting spiritual things first, putting other people first, and I really just think a lot of that group of guys getting up and getting out there at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. It's a good thing. So it's just been encouraging. I have a lot of really, really encouraging things going on this week, and this study will be no different. I'm excited to talk with you about, today we have chapters 2 and 3 of the book of Mark. Jesus in this chapter he'll continue to heal, and he'll continue to call people to follow after him. I think one difference will be that in chapter 1, I think the response was pretty much like uniformly positive. I can't think of a single situation that Jesus came into in chapter 1 that people weren't responding in a positive way, and sometimes in like super positive, like you had whole crowds that were coming to hear Jesus. Chapters 2 and 3 are a little bit different. Now we'll start to see opposition to Jesus. In fact, there's a lot of opposition in the chapters we'll look at. So Jesus is going to heal a paralytic, but in healing him, he's going to say, "Your sins are forgiven." And so the people around are like, "Oh, that's blasphemy, because only God can forgive sins." And they're right about that. But then I guess the question is okay, so then what does that say about Jesus? And then later on, Jesus will call Matthew or Levi the tax collector. And of course, people are going to get upset about that. Tax collectors had a bad reputation, as a reputation for being sinners. So why is Jesus with these people? Then there's a little more benign question about Jesus and why his disciples don't fast. But I think there's still a misunderstanding there. So in that sense, like it's not an overly positive response to Jesus. And then Jesus, his disciples, they're picking grain, and the Pharisees are upset because they're breaking the Sabbath. Jesus then heals a man on the Sabbath, and the Pharisees are upset because now Jesus is breaking the Sabbath too. And they even accuse him of casting out demons by the devil. And so it's a really big swing from all of this really positive and good stuff happening in chapter 1 to now you're seeing, okay, well, it's not all, sunshine and daisies. Jesus is going to have to deal with some stuff. But there are some good things that are going on in this chapter too. So people are being healed. People are coming to Jesus. People are glorifying God as a result of what Jesus is doing, which is part of why Jesus has come here in the first place. And Jesus' disciples in chapter 3 are given the ability to do some of the miraculous things that he was doing. And so that's a cool kind of progression of some of the things that have been going on. And even by the end of the chapter, what we have is we have a group of people that Jesus is close enough to, and people that are close enough to God that he can call them brothers and sisters, right? Even though he's the Son of God, there's humans here that he can call brothers and sisters. And so that's just a really, really, really good thing. But our focus in this season is looking at Jesus' authority. Jesus' authority has the ultimate impact on our lives. From one standpoint, if we recognize Jesus' authority, well, then we need to obey him. If he has the authority to tell the storms to stop, well, then he has the authority to tell me to stop. But also, I think understanding his authority builds trust. If he can calm the storms of the seas, he can calm the storms of my life too. So there's okay, I recognize Jesus can do whatever I need him to do in a particular situation. And so understanding Jesus' authority, it really goes a long way in to us being who we need to be. And so in each chapter, or in this case, these two chapters, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on how this section demonstrates Jesus' authority. So Nick, what are some things that you see in this chapter that show Jesus' authority?
Well, I think we start right at the beginning of chapter 2. When we're looking at the kind of transition, he comes back. It says in verse 1, it was heard that he was at home in the Galilean region, and there were many who gathered together, and there was no longer room. And I think this just speaks to something that we saw in chapter 1. They were amazed at the authority that he was teaching with. And they're coming to be healed by him for sure, but they were gathered together. There wasn't room, and he was speaking the word to them in verse 2. These opportunities in healing are always, we see again in Mark, emphasize the teaching of the word. What is Jesus doing? He's preparing the way for his kingdom. He's teaching as one who has authority and not like the teachers that they were used to listening to. And so this is significant. But I also think, just to stop and point out, you have people who want to hear the word. They are anticipating the Messiah. They are anticipating the greatness of this kingdom. And so when Jesus comes, they are eager to hear. And I wonder if we're so eager to hear the word in that way. If we hear somebody is teaching near us, are we eager to go and hear them? And I think that's a difference here that we see just from the jump. The goal of Jesus' ministry, again, was to prepare for his kingdom. And the miracles of healing were to bring about faith that came through the teaching of his word. And so that's how this kind of section begins, is already we're being reminded of the authority that he had in his teaching. And so we see that at the jump. But we're introduced again to this paralytic man. Or again, we're introduced to this paralytic, and he's carried by 4 men. And he can't get to Jesus. That's okay, because they're going to find a way to get him to Jesus. And so they go up on the roof. They open up. They had dug an opening, and they get a way to get him down to Jesus. They lower him down, and he's on a pallet, and they lower him down in front of Jesus. And the first thing that we see is it says Jesus, seeing their faith, sees their faith. Faith that cannot be seen is not a faith that will follow Jesus. Their faith was seen that they came to the house. Then when they got to the house, they knew they needed to come to Jesus. And so they did whatever they had to do. One of the things I love the most about this story is you see that when people actually recognize the authority that Jesus had and that he taught with, they do whatever they can to get near him. And so these 4 guys, these are awesome friends, right? They are taking this guy and they are lowering him down. They're putting him right in front of Jesus. And so Jesus sees their faith. I think our trust in Jesus should be seen by others. The way that we trust him, the way that we live out our faith, it is something that can be seen, but also our faith should lead us to do ridiculous things. They dug a hole in the roof so that they could get this man in front of Jesus. How much do you trust Jesus? How much do you believe him? Do you really think he can heal you? What power and authority do you believe that he has? And the answer to those questions determines how we respond. It's like Cody said, we're kind of coming face to face with, oh, Jesus is God. He is one with God. He is the Son of God. He is doing great things here. Our faith in that determines how we respond. I also think this is just a side point, Jesus in his response, it says he sees their faith. He doesn't rebuke them for not standing in line. He doesn't rebuke them for breaking in front of all the people. He's no. This is the type of faith that it takes to be a kingdom citizen. And that eagerness and that determination. And we all need to have that type of faith, I think. So then we see him heal him from something that he didn't come to be healed from, right? Like, I don't know what this paralytic, his relationship was with God. We don't know this, but we know that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So Jesus is not wrong in what obviously not wrong in what he says here, but I always think, like, from the person's perspective, like, he knows that Jesus can heal sicknesses and he can't walk. So he's coming to Jesus so that he can walk. And Jesus sees his faith and he says, son, your sins are forgiven. And I just wonder, like, what the response is. Like, some of the scribes, we see the scribes' response. They reason in their heart, like, who is this Jesus? Who does he think he is? Like, again, we've got to grapple with, like, okay, if Jesus is forgiving sins, that says something about who he is and what type of authority he has, for sure. But what about the paralytic who's laying there thinking, like, wait, I thought I was going to get to walk again, right? And I think the point there is he was brought to be healed, and Jesus healed him of something that he needed more than to be able to walk. And we have to remember that too. Like, the gospel is not fixing all our fleshly problems. It's fixing our relationship with God that eternally will solve our one true problem. And we have to see our sicknesses and everything in view of that. Like, do I want people who are sick to be healed? Absolutely. Do I want people who can't walk to be able to walk? Like, praise God that this guy's healed up and able to walk at the end of the story. But that's not the thing that he needed most. And Jesus knew that. He needed his relationship with his Father to be corrected through the forgiveness of sin. All of this comes about. And that he understands their heart. He became aware that the scribes, they were reasoning within themselves. And so he says, what's easier, right? Like, let me show you how much and to what extent I have the authority to forgive sins. What's easier to say? And his point, this is always a little bit trippy for me, but I think his point here is, like, it's easier for Jesus to go around and just claim to forgive sins, right? Like, there's nothing to prove that he can or cannot do that. And he says, so let me do the harder thing to prove, to show you that I can actually do the hardest thing of all. So he says, pick up your pallet and walk. And the guy gets up and he walks, so that you know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins. And he heals the man. And he immediately, there's that word, Mark's word is the immediately word. It isn't like there wasn't a progression, there wasn't therapy, there wasn't, like, he had authority over sicknesses. And he exercised that authority so that the whole crowd would know that he had authority to forgive sins. The crowd understood what he was claiming. They were amazed and glorified God. The scribes understood what he was claiming about himself, but they didn't believe that the physical healing proved his point, because by the end of this, as we continue in the story, as Cody said, we're going to see some challenges. Like, they're going to start trying to find ways to get rid of Jesus, because he is proving the authority that he has. And I think the thing that we have to think about as we're kind of working through this section is, if Jesus is the Son of God, if he has been given all authority, then we have to believe that he is able to forgive and reunite us with God. We also have to know that that's far more valuable than having our fleshly sicknesses taken away, because he's given us something eternal and lasting.
Yeah, and, I love the paralytic story too, where it just seems so obvious to me. Like, okay, if this man is going around healing people, he is forgiving sins, and the Lord's not zapping him up, that, okay, well, we need to put our trust in him. And it just goes to show that, sometimes there's other things going on, right? Like, because somehow the scribes, they see the same exact event as the rest of the crowds, and they decide to fight against this. And it's just, even Jesus showing all of his authority, there's still something for the people to do. And I think you're right to say that, like, it's the faith and the trust that kind of helps to see why some people are going to gravitate towards it versus other people they might push away. I think both of the Sabbath questions or situations, both of those interactions seem interesting to me as far as, like, thinking about Jesus' authority. The first one is at the end of chapter 2, starting in verse 23 down to the end of the chapter, where the disciples are picking heads of grain, and it's on a Sabbath, and they're walking through this field, and you probably imagine, I mean, they're hungry, and they're grabbing these little pieces, they're crushing them together, they're eating them. And obviously, based on the reading, the Pharisees, they didn't like that, and they accused them of breaking the law. And the way that Jesus responds to this, and I think this will be something for us to pay attention to moving forward as Jesus gets more opposition, he never really like addresses the claims directly. It's almost like he's asking them to think bigger, like, and then maybe you'll be able to see what the answer to your question is. So they're asking, hey, basically, Jesus, why are you allowing your disciples to break the Sabbath? And he points back to David and the showbread. And he's like, well, David ate the showbread, which was only lawful for the priest to eat. And in fact, it wasn't just him that was eating. He gave it to all of his boys that were with him too. And like almost like spreading the sin around, or at least that would be the way to think about it. But, and I'm not going to say I always know exactly what to say about everything that David does back in, I think that's 1 Samuel 21. And I don't know everything about why God didn't strike David down, because they weren't supposed to eat the bread, right? It's holy bread. It's only supposed to be for the priests. And I mean, I do know God is gracious, and I think that has to be a part of the conversation. What I do know is here, the disciples were more guilty of breaking like the Pharisees' law than the actual law. And so for them to accuse these people of breaking this law and not accuse David of breaking the law back then, it just shows they're just not being consistent, right? And so Jesus, he points that out, but then at the end, he says, well, I'm the Lord of the Sabbath. Jesus is saying, I have authority over the Sabbath. So that means he knows what should be done on the Sabbath. He knows what shouldn't be done on the Sabbath because he's the one that's in charge of it, right? Him being God, he created the Sabbath. And in fact, he knows what should be done even when they don't know. And that kind of comes up in the second story where Jesus is healing this man who he has a withered hand. And before he heals, though, he asks them, he's like, hey, Pharisees, leaders, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And everybody's silent, right? Nobody wants to answer the question. Either A, they don't really know, or B, they know what the answer, like the implications of said answer. And so this shows like Jesus has an understanding and an authority over the law that these other people, they just didn't. They didn't get it for whatever reason, but Jesus does. And that's why he's able to do all of these things on the Sabbath without the Lord coming in and striking him down and showing, yes, Jesus does really have this authority over the Sabbath. And I think you can understand why this really threw the Pharisees off. If they're thinking of, the Jewish Messiah coming, they'd be thinking at the very least, he's going to make sure that he's, fulfilling the way that we think about all these different laws. But here, instead of that, you have Jesus saying he is Lord over the Sabbath. He is Lord over one of the core components of Jewish life. And essentially he's saying he's greater than the Sabbath. And so that is so much for these Pharisees to handle that down in verse 6, it says that the Pharisees went out and immediately began conspiring with the Herodians against him as to how they might destroy him. And so they make up in their mind, okay, if this guy has this type of authority, well, we have to kill him. We've got to get rid of him. And essentially you have these two extremes that are presented here early in the book of Mark. It's people, when they see Jesus' authority, they're either going to choose to follow him or they're going to choose to reject him. And Nick, I would say that's why we do what we do, whether it's this podcast or why we preach, because we recognize like that's the choice that people have to make. And we want people to recognize Jesus' authority and say, okay, well, I'll follow him and I'll let him take me wherever he wants to take me.
Yeah, that's right. And like the next thing that I wanted to kind of bring out goes right in line with that, because now we're saying like, I'll follow him. Well, we have like disciples who have been saying, I'll follow him. In chapter 1, it was Peter and Andrew and James and John. He said, follow me. And they dropped everything and they followed him. And then earlier in chapter 2, it's Levi, who is also Matthew, who's a tax collector. And he says, hey, follow me. And he follows him. And so it's not like follow me, but only where I want to go. Jesus saying, follow me. And that means I'm going to follow him wherever he goes. Right. And I'm going to go with him, and I'm going to like wherever he wants to go. I love that. And I think like, again, that leads us in a lot of different directions. Like you were saying, whether it's like understanding who he is as Lord of the Sabbath, understanding what authority he has in forgiving sins, as we've already talked about. I'm saying I'm with him and I'm going to go with him. And so we see this again, like he summoned those who he wanted in verse 13, and they came to him, right? Like, here is authority, right? Like, this is king language when I'm reading this. And I don't think I've noticed this before, but like this idea, and maybe it's just a translation thing, I'm not sure, whatever. Like in the New American Standard, it says he went up on the mountain and summoned those whom he himself wanted. Like a king summons people, right? And has the authority to do so. Like if Jesus didn't have this authority given to him by God, then this would be like a silly exercise. Like, hey, you guys, come over here to me. And no, he's actually the King of Kings. He is the Messiah. And they believed that. They came. They recognized his authority. And he appointed 12, right? So he calls them, they come to him, and then he sets out this plan, right? These are 12 who's going to, notice again, Mark points this out, and I'm just going to keep pointing this out. Like the authority is the authority to teach and preach the kingdom of heaven. He appointed 12 so that they would be with him and he could send them out to preach, right? Like that's the purpose, and to have authority to cast out demons, right? So it's interconnected. And so his authority is now being extended to these 12. I think you were saying that, we were talking earlier, and I love that. Like that imagery is like, here is the king bestowing on his servants, these 12, like, you are extensions of myself, right? And I think that's a beautiful thing because of what these men represent, right? You have 4 men who are fishermen that we saw in chapter 1. These are just the ones that we already know about. We already know about Matthew. He's a tax collector. Like, as you were saying, like, if the Jews were looking for a Messiah that was going to reestablish Israel as the kingdom, or are we going to see Jesus as the king of his kingdom? And he's pulling all these people that nobody would have expected. He's pulling all these people that don't fit, that like, he's not going and getting all the scribes. He's not getting the high priest. He gets fishermen. He gets a tax collector. He gets a zealot in this list. Somebody who was like doing everything that they could to, like, the zealots were they were the terrorists, essentially, as I understand it, of the first century, right, against Rome. He even appointed the one who was going to betray him and hand him over to the people who would kill him. These are the extensions of his authority. And my point, I guess, in all that is, like, Jesus will be with them, but they all have a choice now. They have the extension of his authority, and they can choose how they would respond to that authority. And so then Jesus is telling us and teaching us, I think humility is at the center of his kingdom, in the way that he hands out this authority. And so, like, this is not a big point. It's just kind of like thrown in here in Mark's account, like, here are these 12 men, but it is kind of a big connection point to seeing that Jesus is extending his authority to men who look completely different. But the connecting thread is that they came to him and they followed him. And so then that makes them worthy of this. Now, what they do with that authority is going to determine, like, the rest of the story, right? But we're just at the beginning of the story here. So how we respond to Jesus, I think, Cody, is kind of the takeaway that I'm thinking about this, is how we respond to Jesus is going to determine his willingness to forgive us, his willingness to dwell with us, to be our king. It's all based on our response to him.
I mean, absolutely. If you think back to chapter 2 and verse 17, it is not those who are healthy who need a physician, but those who are sick. I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. And so it's like we talked about this before, that the thing is everybody's sick. And so it's only those who recognize that they need Jesus. Those are the only ones who can receive the forgiveness and just have entrance into the kingdom. And unfortunately, as we've seen in this chapter, sometimes people are going to reject that. In fact, towards the end of chapter 3, notice that the Pharisees, what they try to do is they try to dismiss Jesus' authority. I think they recognize that the only way that they can ignore him is if they don't recognize his authority, right? Because if he's doing all these things and all this stuff is true and God did give him this authority, okay, well, that means they need to shape up. And so what they got to do is they have to try to undermine that authority. And so what they say is they do recognize he's casting out these demons. So they say, oh, Well, he's doing that by the authority of Beelzebub or by the authority of Satan and the demons. And Jesus points out, he's like, no, that doesn't even make any sense. He's like, how can Satan cast out Satan, or why would Satan cast out Satan? It just doesn't make any sense, right? And really, these people, I don't even think that they're really all that worried about what they're saying making sense. They just want to try to find some way to undermine Christ's authority. But it just doesn't work like that, because at the end of the day, whether they recognize the authority or not, he has it. And so moving forward, that's going to be a sticking point. The things that Jesus is going to be doing through the rest of this book of Mark, I mean, are they God's will? Like, is he, just like Jesus has authorized the 12 here, God has authorized Jesus. And so if Jesus is doing the things of the Father, well, then they need to pay attention to that, right? And I think the same is true of us as we're, reading through the different things that Jesus says, or these apostles that come after him. As we're reading things they say, when we get to those points where they're saying things that challenge us, right? At that point, it's like, okay, but do they have the authority? Can God really tell me what to do? And the answer is yes. And if the answer is yes, then that means I gotta shape up. And so this is a wonderful couple of chapters here. You have any reflection ideas, Nick?
Yeah, I do. A couple of things that I want. I think this section ends really well, because there is kind of a good transition between chapter 3 and 4. But I think this section ends again with Jesus teaching. It doesn't say it specifically in the text, but his family, his mother and his brothers arrive, and they send word to him and called him. This is kind of a flip, right? Jesus has been calling people to come to him, and so his mother and his brothers are just like, I think we would say like, oh, they're letting him know that they're here or whatever. But it says they called him, and that's really a unique flip in the text. And then the crowd is sitting around him, right? So what like the imagery is that he's teaching again, right? So here is Jesus, and he's teaching the crowds. And so the section wraps up in a lot the same way it started, right? We started with him at the house, and he was teaching, and we're ending now with a crowd around him again, and he's teaching the crowds. And instead of running to his earthly family, he says, look, these people have all come to follow me, right? There's the flip there. And so they've come to follow him. That makes them family. He uses this opportunity of his mother and his brothers calling him to talk about the kingdom family, right? So it flips around, and you see like this distinct contrast between people following Jesus and Jesus saying like, the people who are here are the ones who have come to me when I called them. And that has more value even than the earthly family, the one who does the will of God. I love this. So he ends this way. He says, behold, my mother and my brothers, looking around to those sitting around him. For whoever does the will of God, he is my brother and sister and mother. So as we reflect this week, I think, one, let's remember who we have decided to follow. He's our King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he has been given all authority over all things. But also, we need to think about, are we being family? Are we Jesus's family? Are we doing the will of God? Are you a brother or sister to Jesus? He says, these are my family, the ones who do the will of my Father. Are you willing to follow Jesus's authority in your life?
Thank you for listening to the Honest Reflection Podcast. If you like this episode, give it a like, a share, or even a comment to let us know how we're doing. We hope we've helped you think, reflect, and be honest about your relationship with God, and we can't wait to see you again next week.